Hey, come on in and spend some time with the film hobbyist. My name is Lydia, and I love movies. We're sitting here in a nook of my attic room, a window between us looking out onto my backyard. It's insufferably humid out there, so much so that the air has condensed on my window. We can barely see outside. It's one of those hot gray days with thick cloud covering trapping the wet, hot air. Just a stuffy mess. There may be a storm soon, sometime today or tomorrow or next week. But until then, the outside is the world's most uncomfortable sauna. That's because it's July now. And not just July. Today is the exact middle of the year, the 183rd day. The continental divide between the beginning of the year and the end. All the dates running down the slope until New Year's. This isn't the kind of thing most people care about, this division in a year between part 1 and part 2. Not unless you're in finances. Or if your hobby is movies. See, every year, at the end of the year, you can write a list for your top films. A bunch of film news websites and internet critics release them. It's lots of fun. It's a great time to highlight smaller films that the writer loved that readers or listeners might have missed. It also builds a sort of consensus for what movies are worth remembering into the future. And it's actually a pretty good way to identify a critic's tastes, something incredibly valuable as a reader when keeping an eye out for which movies you might like. But a while ago, Film Internet realized it could easily get another article or video or podcast episode by releasing a summer list for the best films of the year so far. On one hand, yeah, this is a pretty silly way to do this. It's clearly just ad-generating content. But I do think it has genuine value because the lists are always very different. Back in May, I talked about the summer movie season. I should explain that there's kind of a whole film release calendar. It's a guideline, perfectly subject to change, but if you are interested in a certain kind of movie, it's good to note when your kinds of films might be released. January is a film dumping ground. It's cold, so people aren't really getting out of the house a ton. It's also after Christmas, so audiences are less likely to spend money. This makes it the perfect time to release bad movies, especially bad horror movies. Sometimes, though, there are good horror movies that are a little bit risky. Get Out was released in January. Also, Megan, or Mithrigan, that absolutely insane murder robot doll film. February is for chick flicks, sometimes romances or rom-coms, but also sometimes a girls' hangout film. There is also usually some kind of counter-programming, so some very dude films, like an action movie or a war movie. March is a good month. Usually there's a more experimental Pixar film here, or some nice dramas or easy comedies. It's also a month for a risky blockbuster. Hunger Games released here, Project Hail Mary this year. April is for fluff, comedies largely, maybe an early summer film. May is summer movie kickoff, big blockbusters, especially with an eye toward younger audiences, even if they are PG-13. June always has a big Disney release, usually a Pixar or a live-action remake, more blockbusters. July is where we usually get a big superhero release. A war film or other dad movie does well here. August is for comedies, rom-coms, and funny action movies. It's the summer wind down, usually not as big releases. September is a dead zone, the January of the fall. October is for horror, it is what it is. November is a hybrid. You get holiday releases, family movies with bigger ambitions, and you also get the prestige films. These are your Oscar hopefuls, your thoughtful dramas. And then December, in amidst the holiday blockbusters, is filled with festival darlings and award contenders. This is because of recency bias in the awards voting block. The movies you saw most recently will stick out in your mind, which also leads to a big burst of news, especially if a film is good. Studios want the awards voting date to hit that sweet spot with buzz for their film before it turns to backlash. It's a whole thing. And that's why the first half of the year list is different from a second half of the year. Pretty much all the important films come out in November or December. Occasionally, a first half of the year film will make it all year long. Sinners was one of those movies last year. Everything Everywhere All at Once in a previous year. But largely, all the serious dramas and issue films wait to pounce right at the end of the year. So that first half is where you get all the fun movies, the romps, the comedies. Comedies are not considered as important as dramas, even though a good comedy takes so much work to pull off. Comedic actors are, frankly, more versatile than dramatic actors, which is why it's easier for them to make a dramatic turn than vice versa. And yet, it's rare for a comedy to get critical or awards attention. Why, dramas are just about more important things, deep issues. And that, of course, means they're of higher quality. But what makes a silly movie important? When does a comedy cross that line from frivolous to weighty? I think a perfect film to encapsulate this would be the Marx Brothers' most important film, the 1933 picture, Duck Soup. If you aren't familiar with the Marx Brothers, I assure you, you are. Their reach and influence is incredibly far, especially in cartoons. The Looney Tunes really pulled a lot from them, and then later, the Animaniacs as well. It goes beyond that, though. Have you ever put on a pair of those funny nose and glasses with the big eyebrows and silly mustache? Then congratulations! You are familiar with the Marx Brothers. The Marx Brothers were, in fact, a set of 5 brothers, Jewish New Yorkers who put together a vaudeville act in the 19-teens. One of the brothers left to fight in World War I and wasn't interested in performing when he came back. The other brothers kept performing together, moving to Broadway when vaudeville dried up. And then, in the late 1920s, they moved out to Hollywood, bringing their smash hit Broadway sensation The Coconuts to film. Each of their movies is a loose plot built around a series of bits inspired by their character types. Groucho Marx was always kind of the lead. His face is the funny glasses face. He had these big round glasses and would always paint a massive mustache and eyebrows on his face with grease paint. His shtick was that he always played kind of an incompetent idiot in a position of authority. In The Coconuts, he's the owner of a fancy hotel. In Animal Crackers, he's a famous explorer. In Horse Feathers, he's a college president. In most other movies, these kinds of characters would be played by comedic straight men, and the silliness would happen around them. But Groucho just gets to be ridiculous. What makes this shtick work is that he's supported by other characters, usually an established or wealthy woman played by Margaret Dumont, who takes him deadly seriously. Zeppo usually takes a comedic straight man supporting role, often as Groucho's secretary or assistant. I think he's his college-aged son in Horse Feathers. He doesn't have as much to do in the films as the others, but he usually gets a really great bit where Groucho will dictate something to him and the interplay is completely ridiculous. Like, Groucho dictates semicolon, and Zeppo asks him how to spell it. Zeppo is not in all of the movies. Again, he didn't have much to do. Both Groucho and Zeppo will sing in their films. Often, Groucho gets a Gilbert and Sullivan style number where he sings a silly introduction, like Animal Crackers' "I came to tell you I must be going." Chico's shtick was that he had a fake Italian accent. This does lead to lots of jokes, but it's not making fun of the accent as much as it uses the accent to set up wordplay, like an exchange in Duck Soup when a man asks a question about tax policy and Chico says, "I got an uncle who lives in Texas." "No, not Texas. Taxes, money, dollars. That's where he lives, the Dallas of Texas." In the plot, Chico usually plays a schemer, a thief, a con man, a bootlegger. Chico also plays the piano in a very unorthodox manner. It's hard to describe. He uses his fingers oddly. It's highly amusing, a clever bit of physical comedy. Harpo is kind of like a weird hybrid between Dopey the Dwarf and Animal the Muppet. Like Dopey, he's silent and also kind of dim-witted, but he's less like a sweet, innocent baby and more like a toddlerish agent of chaos with no inhibitions, a walking id. He also does the animal thing of chasing after every pretty girl he sees. His scenes are, frankly, some of the most hysterical in any Marx Brothers film, just relentless physical comedy. Plot-wise, he's usually paired with Chico in some kind of scheme. This means Chico can narrate for him. And like Chico, he was also a musician. He played the harp. Surprise, surprise. He doesn't in every movie, but it's usually a sincere moment amidst all the insanity. I trust you can already see the formula for each film just through this character typing. Groucho's authority figure is introduced in ridiculous fashion. Chico and Harpo show up with some sort of scheme. Somehow they end up being hired or recruited by Groucho for another purpose. Hijinks ensue. There are misunderstandings, confusions, pretty girls being chased by Harpo while he honks a horn. Groucho gives a comedic monologue. Chico has a comedic exchange. There's some kind of ridiculous climax, and then the movie is over. The Marx Brothers weren't interested in making high art. They weren't interested in social commentary. They wanted to make silly stories that made people laugh. They wanted to earn a buck being entertaining. Their movies are almost entirely pure popcorn fun. Some of the jokes are cleverly worded, but not to make you think, just to make you giggle. Like Groucho's famous joke in Animal Crackers, "One morning, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas? I don't know." But in 1933, for their fifth film in as many years, they accidentally made an important movie. They legitimately weren't intending to. They went to their graves insisting that they only cared about being silly. So how on earth did this happen? The Coconuts is all about a fancy hotel. Groucho is the silly owner. Zeppo is his assistant. Chico and Harpo are con men trying to rob the rich guests. Animal Crackers is about a bunch of bored rich people. Groucho is a famous hunter. Zeppo is his secretary. Chico and Harpo are thieves hired to steal a famous painting, and then to switch it with a fake, and then to switch it with another fake. Horse Feathers is all about college football. Groucho is the college president. Zeppo is his star football player son. Chico and Harpo are icemen and bootleggers who get accidentally recruited as football players. So in Duck Soup, they needed a new idea for a silly authority figure for Groucho to play. How about the biggest authority you could get? Let's make him president of a nation. What would be the silliest nation? Oh, let's make it some really small, insignificant European country. Margaret Dumont could be the important woman who gets him the job. How about she's a millionaire's widow who is bankrolling the country, so she gets her guy in the position? Zeppo can be the president's secretary. Chico and Harpo need some kind of scheme. I know, they should be spies. But why would they be spies? Maybe there's another country that wants to take over this country, and they want Chico and Harpo to figure out how to do that. Wouldn't it be funny if Groucho started a war with them for some stupid reason? And then Chico and Harpo would have plans to try and steal. It'll be great. A comedy about European countries going to war after trying to annex each other over their leaders' egos. In 1933. Why might that be culturally significant? A few things to note. The Marx Brothers didn't have a crystal ball. They were looking to the past. World War I happened largely because of the egos of men in boardrooms. They couldn't know that Hitler's come to power at the start of the year would have such drastic consequences in the decade to come. In fact, their film came out at a rather inconvenient time. This movie was not a success. Audiences largely rejected it as being in bad taste, whether they were reacting to Hitler's speeches in the aftermath of the Reichstag fire, or just to the cynical tone in the midst of a Great Depression. The audience wanted escapism, and this film, for all its silliness, is not escapist. There's an adage in writing: the specific is universal. If a writer wants their story to be more relatable to audiences, being grounded in specific details makes a story more likely to connect with an audience who find their own specific experiences mirrored in the character's specificity. Comedy is kind of the opposite. Because humor is already so rooted in time and culture, satire even more so, the more direct the satire or comedy, the less funny it is to a wider audience as time goes on. Like, in its time, Gulliver's Travels was a very funny and poignant takedown of British politics and the specific genre of traveler's tales, a contemporary kind of speculative fiction. Most of that stuff goes over the heads of current readers, unless they are holding an annotated edition. What remains is a fun adventure. Duck Soup, on the other hand, is just trying to be silly about the idea of politics and diplomacy and war. And in that generality, it keeps being relevant. It was rediscovered by the 1960s counterculture, and they found it incredibly relatable and clever. It was critics coming out of that context that rebranded this flop as an artistic masterpiece. Watching it today, nearly a century since its release, yeah, it's still relatable. As in most Marx Brothers films, early in the movie, Groucho's authority figure sings a contrary anthem. In this case, it's Laws of the Administration, where he delivers a list of ridiculous demands. Silly rules such as, if chewing gum is chewed, the chewer is pursued, and in the hoosegow hidden. Again, just a silly choice to throw them in jail for chewing gum, but one that actually happened in Singapore in 1992 in the country's attempt to build a perfect image. In my most recent watch, the satire was so on point, I had difficulty laughing in such lines as, "The last man nearly ruined this place. He didn't know what to do with it. If you think this country's bad off now, just wait till I get through with it." Just a silly choice for a silly character who is a silly president. Throughout the film, Sylvania is trying to start a war. It's clear this part of the plot wasn't as important to the Marx Brothers as the very funny lemonade stand bit with Chico and Harpo, or their version of the mirror gag, a comedy bit where two actors dressed the same way copy each other's movements as if they are mirror reflections of each other, which this film probably contains the best version of. So there's some hand-waviness over the Sylvanian ambassador's schemes to start a war. The first, briefly mentioned, is an attempt to pay revolutionaries to overthrow the government. Vaguely conspiracy thinking in 1933, an accurate depiction of history in the 1960s era of the Bay of Pigs, or in our current world, shaped by the many proxy wars of the Cold War. The second plan is to try and woo the millionaire's widow to bring her money to Sylvania, but instead, the war happens when Groucho's character, attempting to get the ambassador to cause an international incident, causes the international incident by slapping the ambassador after the mild insult of being called an upstart. This was, again, pulling from World War I history, but so directly and accidentally offended Mussolini that he banned the film in Italy. It feels equally relevant in an era of today's thin-skinned autocrats. The grand centerpiece of this film is a musical number late in the story, when all the diplomacy and backhanded schemes lead to a declaration of war between the nation of Fredonia and the scheming Sylvania. It's the only musical number in any Marx Brothers film which all four brothers performed together. In its specific context, it actually follows the style of a minstrel number, though without any blackface. Minstrelsy, stripped of its racial component, is a performative folksiness, an over-the-top artificial populism. And that is the silliest choice for a declaration of war. Outside of that specificity, it's still very silly to see a whole room of people shouting, to war, Fredonia goes to war, oh Heidi, 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 ho. I had to research this movie to learn that an old spiritual was parodied in the lyrics, they got guns, we got guns, all God's children got guns. Because that sentiment, that silliness of justifying a war by stripping it to who has weapons, is just so broadly applicable. It makes complete sense why it was funny during the nuclear-infused Cold War, just as it does in the midst of current warmongering. Groucho Marx reportedly, late in his life, when asked about the significance of this film, answered, "What significance? We were just four Jews trying to get a laugh." And considering that this was the fifth film of theirs in 5 years, the last picture ode in a contract, one cobbled together from several different scripts, I genuinely believe him. It's just that when you're silly about something important, taking a serious topic and poking fun at it, treating something weighty as the setup for a punchline, you might accidentally end up saying something profound, relatable, far past your intentions. And I do wonder that when film critics and awards institutions dismiss comedies as unimportant fluff and pure silliness, which of those works may end up in the history books as a masterpiece of continually relevant cultural commentary? Which of those films released in the year so far might end up far more important than those self-serious dramas as the days spill into months and years and decades? So let us keep an open mind and a hearty laugh. Thanks for coming.